have us go live, and I see we've got people already in the waiting room, and there'll be a little bit of delay. So when you start hearing this, hello, welcome. It is Tuesday, August 26th as we're recording this. I come to you from Colorado, and Jake and Hannah from Hawaii. Oh, there we are live. Let me mute that on my side. Okay, we're there, and I see folks. Let me put something in the chat. Okay. Talking about resilience versus adaptability. Okay. So I see, there we go. Hey, Christy Marvel. Christy, thanks for being there. I have your email with your document. I will be going through that. I think it's number one on top of my email right now. She says, all looks good. Sounds good. You guys say hi so she can hear you.
Hey there.
Hey, hi, Christy.
Are you seeing things in the Riverside chat? Because we're not.
Oh, nope. I didn't even look though. I am in YouTube.
Not critical. I don't know if it's something that can link. Or if not, you just let us know if people have questions or comments.
I thought it was supposed to link. I'm just not seeing it.
Okay.
But I've got YouTube pulled up, so I'm seeing the chats over there. No, I think it is supposed to be in Riverside. We'll see if it populates. Okay. Well, hey, we're there. Christy says we're live, and I can see a group of people that are in there. Good to have you. There's my brother, Jared. Jared just hosted an event online like this, but it actually took place. So the impetus was over in Hawaii. And brother, I had it on my calendar. I was going to be there, and then somebody showed up to buy some furniture. So goes the move. But man, honored that you're here, brother. All right, you guys ready?
Ready.
Okay. Well, welcome to another session with S.A.G.E. And in this one, Jake proposed we talk about resilience versus adaptability, something that we talked about quite a while ago, is not an official part necessarily. I think it's mentioned in the S.A.G.E. blueprint, but we don't give a lot of focus to it. And I like it, not just to be contrarian against resilience, but resilience, I've never heard or never witnessed a time when it was a bigger buzzword is resilience. There's books on resilience. It comes up in a lot of messages from psychologists and professors and whatnot these days on being resilient. We all know that concept of, it's not that you fall down, it's whether you get back up again. And then Jake and Hannah, as we're talking about the S.A.G.E. concept and personal agency and inner security and things of that nature, are questioning, well, let's look at why we keep getting knocked down and having to get back up. So I have some personal experience with this. I wanted to walk through with you on it, but do you want to give just your front definition and viewpoint on resilience? And I said verse adaptability, and I don't even know if you want to go that far, but that's how I think about it. Or do you just put it in alignment with, alongside, in addition to?
Yeah, first I want to adjust something that you said, which is that we keep getting knocked down. And I would say we keep knocking ourselves down, right? And some people will may struggle with that. Hannah and I met with a psychologist yesterday, and really wonderful, smart lady, really excited about S.A.G.E. and the blueprint. And yet going to that place where she would say, I make myself feel blank, or I knock myself down. She had a really hard time taking that step. And she just found that level of personal responsibility, the idea that we do these things to ourselves, she found that very difficult. So we know that that can be a challenge, that people can challenge themselves. What I did with her is I just encouraged her, just try it. Just try saying something with that structure and notice how you feel. Notice the difference in your body. So that was kind of a tangent. But in terms of adaptability, this is actually a huge topic that is kind of an umbrella for S.A.G.E. because when you think about the fact that we are saying people don't experience reality, they experience their interpretation of it. Well, interpretation changes. It changes depending on context and circumstance. One person could say a sentence to you and you'd hear it in a particular way, you'd make a particular meaning. Another person could say the same thing, you might hear it in a different way. The question is, can you adapt? Can you recognize how you are altering the way you make meaning in real time? And the biggest point for me about adaptability goes to a conversation we had with Kevin earlier today. Kevin's been reading some Krishnamurti, who's a spiritual teacher, maybe from the 60s and 70s. I think some really great insights and material. I loved his books. I read them about 20 years ago. But Kevin pointed out that one of the places he didn't resonate with Krishnamurti, and I don't either, is the idea that life is difficult. Life is difficult and we have to learn to be resilient. This idea that's very prevalent today. When I was in my teens, M. Scott Peck came out with his famous book called The Road Less Traveled. And if I remember right, the first few words are, life is difficult. And boy, he hooked me. I just thought, because I was a teenager, I confused myself about the world. And here's somebody saying life is difficult. And I just jumped on that. I no longer think that's a constructive frame. And what concerns me more is that we don't even realize that we're living inside that frame, that it's not reality. It's just a frame, it's a way of making meaning. So, in this conversation about adaptability, there's adaptability in terms of how we make meaning. There's adaptability in terms of our emotions. Can we be adaptive? And we'll talk more about that. And there's adaptability in terms of my identity. How do I think of myself? Am I holding on so tightly that when someone challenges my identity, I fall down or I break or I become highly reactive? All of those suggest resilience is necessary. I will be knocked down or I will knock myself down, and then I need to be resilient. I need to recover. And my thinking is we don't need to recover generally. There are times where we do. Mostly what we want to do is be proactive instead of reactive. Resilience is reactive and adaptability is proactive. It's where I'm shifting with the flow of life as opposed to trying to recover after being wounded or hurt or falling down.
Seems like it's got more focus on the present in adaptability and more focus on the past with resilience.
Now, resilience is always what happened.
And bouncing back.
How do I recover? How do I bounce back?
Right.
Adaptability is being in the moment and asking
and adapting.
Right. How can I adapt right now?
Right.
You just said bouncing back from what happened. And then, of course, now I know to question, well, what did actually happen? So if I can give a very tangible, true life story, back 3 years ago or so, when my wife and I, my former wife and I, really hit a valley, and we started some pretty intense couples counseling with a therapist. So we would go to the office, meet with this therapist, and I heard stuff from my former wife that I devastated myself to such a degree that afterwards I would go out, and there was a running trail nearby, and run myself into the ground just to kind of expunge myself, recover, try to bounce back, try to bounce back from what happened. Well, what happened? I was not in physical danger. And I think about that, Jake. We were talking about injuries recently. You know, I've had plenty of injuries in my athletic life where you break a bone and you can't move. Now that you need to recover from. That's something, objective reality happened. Your bone's broken, you can't move. And so I need to recover and bounce back. But I'm in a therapy office. I was not hit with a bat. There were no broken bones, no external blood. I think I bled inside because of what I did to myself. And now I look at it and go, she was talking about herself. She was talking about her projection. She was telling me about her interpretation of me. Now, if I agreed with it and thought I was whatever she might be saying, that was a different thing, but I didn't. If I could have been adaptable and understood those aspects, I would have had nothing to recover from. I would have walked out and gotten my car and driven away. And I cared, not that I wasn't concerned, but I would consider my interpretations and whether they were constructive and productive and whatnot. But I destroyed myself, utterly did, to the point where I did need to be resilient. So that's where this is very tangible to me. If I could have had Sage, again, this is just 3.5 years ago, then I needed resilience because I destroyed myself. If I had been adaptable, I wouldn't have. I had nothing. I would have had nothing to recover from. My tracking.
Yeah, absolutely. It would have also most likely would have dramatically changed the course of the conversation.
I wasn't much use in the conversation. I was sitting there tending to my wounds and trying not to crawl under the table. And going back, and it was just threats, perceived threats to my identity. Um, and I don't know if we would want, I don't want to confuse things, but it did remind me, Jake, of your perspective on fear versus anxiety. To me, it
Yeah,
aligns with his resilience and adaptability.
yeah, I think that's a really nice insight. I hadn't thought about that. And I won't go into a lot because we talked about it in a previous segment. But the basic idea is that we often talk about being afraid. And when we think it's fear, it activates our primitive brain. And our primitive brain's response to fear is fight, flight, freeze. And now there's also the word fawn.
Mhm.
Those responses are really appropriate when we are in physical danger and there really is something to fear. But I don't know what percentage. I'm going to say it's 99% of the time. We don't have to fear damage to our physical well-being. What we're experiencing is, as Kevin talks about it a lot, is a threat to our identity, my sense of who I am. That's not fear, that's anxiety. That's actually arising in a different part of the brain, predominantly the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is not designed for fight, flight, or freeze. It's designed to think. It's where our executive functions are. It's where we can change the way that we interpret things and make new meaning. That's the really effective way to deal with anxiety. And when we say things like, well, I'm afraid, or, you know, you scared me, we inadvertently are stimulating the primitive brain. So I really encourage people to be very deliberate about whether you use the word fear or anxiety. And for therapists listening, um, I just see all the time that the two words are used interchangeably, and I think they're actually very, very different.
I did a show within the past 6, 7 months, I think, talking about this, and it was addressing it, but I don't think with the clarity that I get from your explanation right there. And it was asking, yeah, the concept of why did I have the fear sitting completely physically safe, sitting in that therapist's office, and the fear was, I was going to say it was as bad as if a bear had been chasing me. I've actually been in contact with bears. It was far worse. I would much rather have a physical aspect or a physical injury than what I experienced with my identity. That was really the worst damage I ever did to myself. It was no injury was that bad. I do want to pull something out here in the chat. So this is my brother, Jared Angaza. He said, I've been teaching on resilience for years. Uh, I believe in it. And lately I've been exploring anti-fragility. There's a nuance and important difference. I feel it's more about adaptability too. I like that term, and I've heard it in past months, and I don't remember where. Jake, I don't know if it was from you or maybe another therapist on the show, but anti-fragility. And in my own interpretation of that, I think that aligns with adaptability, not being anti-fragility. Thus, you would not to be need to be resilient. Is that a term you use?
I haven't, but I relate to it. And to finish your answering your question about the relationship of adaptability and resilience to fear and anxiety, I think that you're correct, Kevin, that when I live in a state of fear and I react with fight, flight, freeze, I need to be resilient. But when I'm dealing with anxiety, I don't need the resilience. I need to interpret things in a different way. I need to be flexible. I need to adapt and shift. And it's true in all sorts of areas of our lives, um, particularly particularly valuable when we're interacting with people and there's tension, because as soon as we step into the world of fight, flight, freeze, that dynamic is not going to go well. But if we can keep our modern brain active, where we're thinking well, we're creative, we're curious, we can make enormous progress in a short amount of time.
That's what I think of now when I feel those emotions start to percolate, that threat physiology, as you taught me, start to come in a conversation and go, oh, I see that insecurity or that whatever it is, and what's going on with that. That feels like the time to be adaptable. Now I step back and look and go, okay, what are they interpreting? How am I interpreting? What's constructive? What do I agree with or align with? And it's this awareness, just an awareness that is so different. Meanwhile, my pulse rate stays down. I walk away from it. That I'm still enamored. I still enamor myself with that, with the conversation that may come over that would in the past, I would have known I'm not going to sleep well tonight. That was a reality for me. That was what I lived with back then. And now I'll get the text or the communication or whatever it may be, or the encounter, and realize, okay, I recognize those feelings, and I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. Even if in the moment I'm not Mr. Stone Cold, even in the moment, if I can feel it. It's going on. I do have my heart rate is up a little bit. I'm feeling it, but I know that when it ends and I'm going to come out, I don't need to be resilient because I haven't devastated myself. I'm gonna kind of calm myself down and then consider it. Start. What am I going to adapt to? What am I going to interpret? And the security I gain from knowing it's my personal agency. I get to agree with the person or consider or not. I can reject. I have so many options. What a gift. That's yeah.
Yeah, you're talking about two different things. One is how we make meaning, our interpretations, and the other is the emotion that results from our interpretation. And for those people who aren't familiar with this idea, it's called the 90-second rule. And it was something that Jill Bolt Taylor created after, I think she a neuroscientist, Kevin, or do you remember
I
what her
know the
background?
name.
She had a stroke, and it was a very debilitating stroke. And in the process of having it, she was able to watch and observe what was happening. And then she had to go through a long period of recovery. And what she ended up, one of the things that she took away from this, and there's a good TED talk about this, Jill Bolt Taylor. She ended
You're
up
right, neuroscientist.
neuroscientist. So she really
Actually, it says
understood
American neuroanatomist.
neuroanatomist. Okay. What she recognized was that emotions have a lifespan of about 90 seconds. And she was able to see this because her brain wasn't operating in a normal fashion. And so she was able to observe it with this deep understanding she had. And she realized that emotion arises and it dissipates after approximately 90 seconds. Now, the only reason it doesn't dissipate is if we continue to tell the same story that we've been telling. And then what we're doing is we're creating a loop. But the point is, in terms of adaptability, if I understand that my emotions are temporary, and from our point of view, that I'm creating my emotion, I can adapt by just allowing myself to travel down that path, to feel what I'm feeling, to not be overly reactive, to not be overly self-critical, if hopefully not at all, but to be curious and to know that in a minute or in 90 seconds at probably the most, I will be in a different place. That's adapting, as opposed to latching on, having judgments about my own emotion. And of course, the worst thing is blaming other people for them, because when I do that, I disempower myself. And so now I've made the situation even worse. And, If it's Kevin, he can go out and run 6 miles as a way to dispel some of that frustration and energy. Not a lot of people can do that. And we end up sitting with that internal destabilization and dysregulation, which is extremely unhealthy.
Isn't
Well,
there a chemical that's released that only lasts 90 seconds as well?
Yeah, it's a chemical cocktail. It's a combination of cortisol and adrenaline, and both are very. I always forget to say this. None of these things are bad in and of themselves. Resilience is a great quality. Adrenaline, cortisol rushes are very productive in the right context. But when those chemical cocktails arise, when I'm trying to connect with Hannah or we're trying to work through something we don't agree on, I'm really working against myself. Whereas if I can stay calm and stay present, then we have all sorts of opportunity to connect.
somebody recently that I had on the show, and I wish I could remember who it was, but they mentioned her. Uh, they mentioned Jill Bolt Taylor and that study. And I thought, that's, I wonder if that's why it wasn't given a whole lot of focus, because that's gonna, a lot of people are gonna offend themselves with that, I would assume, to say, because it's in essence, I feel like she's kind of given us a little grace of going, okay, for 90 seconds, maybe Kevin, while you're sitting in the counselor's office, you fall into threat physiology. You're not choosing to terrify yourself, but it's, of course, I believe it's still coming from my own experience and beliefs and whatnot that I can alter. But in that moment, she's saying, okay, I'll give you 90 seconds. It's happening to you per se. If you want to do with that, you get 90 seconds of that. After that, you're doing it to yourself. I, I didn't want to hear that then, especially at the level of terror I was feeling. It does. I'm interested in your thoughts here though, because I remind myself of a book. I forget the author's name, but it's called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers.
Mhm.
Comes from a more, my memory is more of a physiological functional medicine type standpoint, but he's depicting the zebras out there on the savannah eating grass, hanging out with their buddies, and then boom, the lion comes and boom, they're flooded with a chemical cocktail. Thank God, that's what they're supposed to do. They take off like a bat out of hell, run, lion nips them in the butt, doesn't quite get them, then tires out, and they go on, chases over, they didn't die. And what do? They go back to chewing grass and hanging out with their buddies. They don't end up later at dinner last night going, guys, you'll never believe what happened. Holy crap, I can't even think about it. I was so triggered. I actually pissed myself a minute ago, even just thinking about it. And for the next 90 days, I'm going to need to be in therapy. Now, that so unpolitically correct, my perspective right there, I guess, because I'm not minimizing somebody who's been to war and, had incredible tragedies and PTSD and whatnot. And yet, and I'm hopefully I get some credit for saying I myself, in not too long ago, destroyed myself to that level. You'd think I had been in a war and I was sitting in a therapist's office, and yet I again destroyed myself when, as she's pointing out, 90 seconds of that maybe is legit. After that, I did it to myself, and I did it for months. I did it for a lifetime to some degree. And so I like seeing the studies on that to show to me again, it doesn't, I could take that and offend myself with it, or go, thank God, there's some hope that I don't have to live with this terror and this pain. It reminds me, Hannah, of your story of, we talked about it here before, of, childhood or in your youth abuse, that you realized, I don't know the timeline, 10, 20 years later, far after it was gone, far after you had removed yourself from it, and you realize, wait, that was back there. I'm the one abusing myself with it today, and I don't want
Right,
to.
right, right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
To be politically correct, which I rarely bother to do, the 90-second rule doesn't apply to every situation and every person. There are situations where a person is truly not safe, and the 90-second rule is no longer relevant because the actual threat is continuing. So we don't want to say that in every situation, everyone can move through their emotion in 90 seconds. But the vast majority of the time, I think this is a constructive way for me to think about my emotions as opposed to feeling stuck. And the way we talk about it is that we stick ourselves in whatever the emotion is. I stick myself in anxiety. I stick myself in fear. I stick myself in depression. Um, well, if I'm sticking myself, I can unstick myself. Yeah.
You, in one of our past discussions on this topic, you gave a reference to just what you said there, that if you are under a quote perceived threat, but you're really under, and it was something along the lines of an authority. There is something that is actually has the ability to be over you, have power over you, oppress. It could be a boss, a parent, a larger person, whatever it may be. And that's a little different than me sitting in the therapist office with my wife and a small female counselor. Fair?
Yeah, it is different. This is why I used to be an organizational consultant. And for a while, I tried to take SAGE into the corporate culture. And I ended up discouraging myself because in a corporate culture, there is a power differential between the boss and the
Right.
employee. And the employees would always resist the idea that they were empowered because the other guy wrote the paycheck and they needed the paycheck. And I recognize that there's a truth there. But what I did point out to them was you choose to work here. It's not the only option you have. So you are choosing to participate in this dynamic. And I don't want to sound glib about it, like, oh, well, go get another job. That's not always that easy to do. But as you'll pick up listening to us, our theme is often one about empowerment. It's about personal empowerment, also known as personal agency. And from that place, so many more options are available to us. And that's again coming back to adaptability, that we don't see ourselves as stuck and we don't see ourselves as victims. And this is really, actually, Kevin, it might be fun when we were creating the blueprint. Kevin came up with what I thought was a great metaphor where he talked about the difference in building things with nails versus screws. And the three of us got really excited. We thought this was a very elegant way to share this idea. So maybe you could talk about that, Kevin.
Nails and screw. Yeah. I so did a majority of the building of a large home and realized that they so often use screws. And especially I actually milled wood from my land and used the natural wood as the trim. So the trim that you would put, down on the bottom, like with carpet and whatnot, and realize they usually use finishing screws and whatnot. But I'm a guy who tends to make a mistake or I want to change something. And when you put the nails in, you go
Do
back
they, do,
later.
do they usually use screws? That's what you're saying? Or do
Oh,
they
I'm
use
sorry, nails. Sorry,
nails?
Yeah.
thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
They use nails. Nails is the predominant. We use a zillion nails, and I got to realizing, okay, it's my house for one. I don't want to because then it's so hard to take apart. You screw up something with a nail, and you end up with a sawzall. And anybody who's ever used them, it's just to me, it's violent. It's loud, and you're ripping through metal and wood and whatnot. And I like screws. If you mess something up, if you want to modify it, you can do that with a screw. And then I did a little bit of homework on that and realized that not in all cases, but primarily, a screw actually creates a tighter bond. It's actually stronger and more rigid. And so, as we're talking about adaptability here, I thought I like that. I don't want to be just floating out in the ether with a bunch of parts. At some point, I do want to make a decision on something and say, you know what, I interpret this as the best decision, the best way to step forward. And I'm going to step forward on this. And I'd like to step forward on a solid structure. I'm going to make that solid structure with screws. It's solid as you can get, maybe more than nails. And it'll hold me. And if I decide to modify it or realize I made a mistake, man, I can just buzz that thing out. But if it's something I made out of nails, not only is it so much more difficult to modify, but because I created it with nails, I'm going to speak personally. There was a lot of things in my life I had nailed together as truths, right, wrong, black, white, my faith. I had nailed it together. So not only is it hard, but because of the expense, the effort, and the hardness, I kind of found myself just wanting to defend it. I don't really want to be adaptable. I don't want to really hear your view because I'm going to protect this nailed in structure. I don't want to be that guy any longer. So now I'm going to come to you with my structure. It's the best I've figured out to this point. This is how I look at my beliefs today. My beliefs. I am believing in X. I try to not even use the word belief. I am choosing to believe in X. I have a diet that I am believing in. I have an exercise regimen. I have SAGE that I'm believing in, all tightly together in a good structure with screws that I can modify. So, man, if you want to talk about it and poke holes in it and question it, let's do it, because I really just want the best structure. And if you can add something to it, dude, I can change that sucker. And if you share something and I think, no, I don't think that's any better than the one I got, then I'm good. I got a strong structure. So there's my screws and nails analogy.
Oh, I think you really nailed that.
Touche. And yeah, no questions, please. I'd like the comments to remain closed for now.
We had a good time when Kevin came up with this. We started talking about instead of saying things like "you nailed it," we would talk about screwing yourself.
Yeah, just
And then we came up with the idea. The goal is to unscrew yourself, right? You want to have the ability to unscrew yourself, which is about adaptability, right?
Yeah.
And it was a really fun way for us to be bringing this to life. And Kevin left a message this morning. I won't go into a lot of detail, but he was talking about humor, the value of humor, and how since we have all been involved in SAGE, we notice that we tend to have fairly deep and what we think are substantive conversations about things that are meaningful. They may be things where we challenge ourselves, we trouble ourselves. But what we notice is that there's humor frequently that sort of alleviates the tension, it alleviates the heaviness. And the way I think of that is we just don't take ourselves as seriously in the SAGE orientation. We're not holding on so tightly to some idea that I have about who I am or who Hannah needs to be or how we need to behave. We do have ideas, but we hold them loosely. And if an idea I have doesn't work for me, then I unscrew it. I make an adjustment. I move a little to the left or a little to the right, and I put the screw back in. And then I see how things roll.
I am thinking about it as you talk, Jake. And even if I go back and look at what I've told the story about of some past counseling, and to me at the time, I literally said it was the greatest trauma I had ever experienced. And it was the greatest trauma I ever interpreted in my life. Uh, was the devastation I created out of a threat to my identity. And I look at it now and go, oh my gosh, I would be tempted without the SAGE orientation to feel a lot of guilt. I can't believe I did that. And I took that energy to my kids and to other people. I hurt my work with it. I did. And now to look back and to have, from my past faith-based aspect, to have grace for myself, have self-compassion. That's a big part of it. And to have some levity with it. Yeah, I help myself a lot with the ability to laugh at these things that are, um, they were as serious to me as I think anybody's trauma was. I don't want to ever minimize the pain that someone interpreted from something, but man, mine was I created I created mine. If I did not have Sage, I would say I'd be sitting here telling you what my former wife did to me, and she just didn't. Uh, I did it, even with circumstantial stuff. And anybody who's been through a divorce or separation, I'm sure there are some hard, tangible, circumstantial things that happen, maybe around money or possessions or kids or whatnot. But even there, outside of the hardship there, at the end of it, all I see is my identity. That's the greatest threat. And even if there is a deficit circumstantially, again, at the end, it's me. It's me and how I perceive myself.
Yeah, it comes back to your interpretations. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this
Yeah.
idea about interpretations, if I don't take responsibility for how I make meaning, which is what SAGE is largely advocating, if I don't do that, then I have a much harder time being adaptable. If I hold other people accountable for how I feel, what can I do? I mean, the only thing I can do is try to get you to change so that I feel better. Well, that may work, it may not. It almost always creates some kind of tension and backlash at some point.
Okay, I'm I'm going to address that, but and then I'm going to come to something my brother said that I really like, a perspective that he shared. But Jake, with what you said there, I remember, and I may have mentioned it before, there's a guy who's gotten to be really well known, name is Tom Bilyeu. He was one of the founders of Quest. If you've been in grocery stores, the Quest, one of the early, not early, but one of the energy bars, and billion-dollar company and big story. And he had a segment. I had him on the show once, and it wasn't on my show, but it was around that time. And he called it "It's All My Fault." And he made this preposterous story that if a plane or a meteor or something was going through the sky and crashed into his house and killed his wife, he's going to say it's my fault.
Mhm.
Now, again, if it's an exaggerated thing, I would not align with the verbiage that he used anymore. But what I got out of it is, even if we look at this concept of I am creating my own emotions, I am creating my interpretation, I am devastating myself with what I perceive could be an attack from somebody, it's on my identity. That could feel unfair. And I've heard that from a lot of people. And I have some understanding for how that can feel unfair. And maybe in some cases it can, we might all agree that, oh, it's a little unfair. What really I enamor myself with, though, is what's the alternative? What hope is there in the alternative? If I am a victim, and we would all agree with it, I go, okay, we all agree I was victimized. But I'm not going to be a victim, even if it's unfair. Again, what hope is there in on the other side? So I'm going to err on the side of, in Tom's vernacular, it's all my fault, because it's the only place, that was his verbiage, the only place I have any power. And over here would say it's where our personal agency is. So if any of this feels unfair, I'd say, man, I think I have some, I resonate with that some, and yet I'm still going to make my bet with personal agency.
Yeah, I'm good with it. The only thing I would change is fault. I would just say it's
Yeah.
all my personal responsibility. It's all my responsibility. We've done this in our relationship, and I've done this in counseling with a lot of couples where, they always will parse things. They'll go, well, I think it's 50-50. It's her and 50 me. Or they'll go, this is 80% on her, only 20% on me. And I always say to people, why don't you think that it's just 100% you?
You did that to me,
I
jerk.
did do that to you.
Yeah.
You're
I
welcome.
I interpreted you as mean.
Yeah, it's happened
You did
before.
you did that in the crux of my marital stuff. You said, "Well, why don't you just assume it's 100% your fault?" I I
Was it
wanted to
later?
resonate at the time, though. I remember I just, no, like I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I can let go of that. That was yeah. I struggled with that.
Yeah, yeah. So
Well,
it's a source of empowerment is the point, that when I take full responsibility, I say, I can do something. I am creating a problem for myself. And since I'm the one creating this, I have options. I can do something.
But I don't have to stick myself into blaming myself.
Right.
thank
And
you.
that's why last week I think we did the no praise, no blame, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And we talked about how foundational that is, that when people are in OS2, you're right, they're hearing this and they're going, boy, that sounds harsh. I don't want to blame myself. But we've taken blame and praise out of the SAGE orientation. And if you don't understand that, there's a whole segment we did on that topic.
Well, Hannah, thank you. That is exactly where I was going to go, because I think in the moment, trying to remember back at how I interpreted you saying that, Kevin, why don't you just take 100% responsibility? I felt like, oh, I'm gonna take the blame off of her and put it on me, and I wasn't. That didn't feel good. No, 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 that's not it either. As my brother would say, there's a third way. Um, okay, I don't want to forget his. I just feel like it's another good analogy, kind of along the line of the screws and nails. Jared said, I think resilience is about being able to take the hits and continue anyway. Adaptability allows you to reframe the hit uh, to belonging, and then I adapt. That feels stronger. Yeah,
I would go
agree.
even further, Jared. I would say that adaptability allows me to minimize the likelihood of a blow. That when I live in this orientation and I'm highly adaptable, I experience far fewer blows in my life. And then when they do occur, I'm able to adapt or recover more quickly. And for those of you in couple relationships, this idea of uh, and one other thing I'll mention in a minute, has eliminated, I don't know, 80, 90% of the blows between us. They just don't arise. Part of it is being adaptable, flexible, curious. And then the other, which I'll mention, and we'll probably do a show on this at some point, is what we call the redo, which is that when I do behave poorly, when I do overreact, I recognize that, hopefully quickly, and I can come back and I can redo myself. And what I mean by that is not to apologize, but to say, I don't feel good about the tone of voice I just used when I spoke with you. So I want to say what I said a minute ago, but I want to say it in a different tone of voice. And I've never had the other person not be receptive. People are always receptive because you're taking responsibility for something that didn't go well. And so they're like, yeah, go ahead, say it again. And then I would say myself in a way that feels more mature and more considerate. And immediately we reconnect.
It always works.
Yeah. And it used to be, how long did it take us before we would do a redo?
A day or so.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was a day of suffering.
Yeah.
And we've gotten that down to.
And constantly this cycle of rethinking the thing and hurting oneself and
keeping the emotions
stirred up.
Yeah. And now I think we both pride ourselves. Our redos are somewhere in the range of, I don't know, 20, 30 seconds before one of us will say, hey, wait a minute. I want to redo myself. So again, this is sort of an antidote to the idea of blame.
When you said this was something that took away 80% or so of the conflict, I was really hoping the answer was epic sex, but I'm gonna.
That's the other 20%.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. I wanted clarity. I was hoping for an interpretation that fit me. Mary in here cited in the chat the book Unstuck. She's the title of a book on overcoming depression by James Gordon. I'm not familiar with that, but it looks like somebody else resonated with that. So thanks. I always I appreciate resources continually that I find, it's such a sage overlap, things that that I confirm myself with that. Ralph says, in quotes, if there's a problem here, I've caused it, by Jess Lair. I don't know that name either. Thank you. And then Mary said, a source of empowerment. Thank you, Hannah. Taking responsibility is different than blame and may open creative next steps. Yeah, I agree, Mary. I think I've struggled with blame, specifically being somebody who was okay, I'm not going to blame someone else. I'm not going to blame circumstance, because it gives the power to them. And I just tried to figure out how to blame myself. And I did not find that constructive, but I just didn't have, I wasn't aware of another context. That's all I had. Those are the only tools I had at that point. And then Jared says, I often ask myself and my children, so how would you handle this if there was no one else to blame?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And the only concern I have about that is it implies blame. In other words, if there's no one else to blame, then what do I do? Do I blame myself?
Well, I've heard this from him. I think he's saying no one else to blame, including us. There's just no blame.
No blame. Yeah.
I've been playing with that. I think I've mentioned it. I continue to, not as much anymore. Maybe I'm actually evolving into it without having to ask, but in a specific situation where I am feeling something, how would a secure Kevin respond? And just realizing it is different than what my norm used to be, even to the aspect of, a lot of times, how did the insecure Kevin respond? He didn't. He ran. I think I mentioned this to you, Jake. Because I went through a time of saying I didn't have any boundaries. I still say that. I need to catch myself, because I think it was you who said, no, you had boundaries. They were just very unhealthy, and you just ran like hell. Kind of back to the fight, flight, freeze, fawn. I did those things instead of constructively engaging or speaking something or whatnot. Um, yeah, Jared said, I
That's
take
yeah,
responsibility. There's no blame at all.
yeah,
Okay.
beautiful. Yeah.
You know, going back to childhood trauma,
Yeah.
um, I, I was abused by my father, and I blame him for that. And there is a period of time uh, that I worked quite hard on uh, the the damage that was done. When and I still at this time can have kind of shock myself with memories of that trauma. But I am now choosing not to allow that uh, trauma to affect how I'm feeling today. I'm not saying that the way I'd like to say it.
Well, one of the other parts of this, and it's probably another conversation, is Hannah gives herself permission to blame, which is politically incorrect in the psychology world today. Everyone advocates that forgiveness is necessary to heal, and you have demonstrated that that does not feel constructive to you.
Not at all. No, because there was never an apology. There was never any acceptance of wrongdoing. And I'm fine with never forgiving this man.
Don't you think more than fine? Don't you think that
I'm more
you,
empowered
yeah,
as a result.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I did question you guys at one point with the blame, and maybe there's a better word with, in your case, Hannah. So your father abused you. He did something. He committed a what we would all understand as a wrongful act, even legally. He did that. So is he to blame? Well, yeah, you didn't do it to yourself. If somebody sticks me in the neck with a fork, I didn't. I don't look at it and go. I interpret that. I hurt myself with you sticking a fork in my. No, you did it there. But then, well, let's take maybe take that and go, okay, with that there is damage done. And I think anybody here and most people have encountered something where you were victimized in some aspect and some damage was done, and that has meaning. I struggled with reconciling this with you guys early on. There's meaning there. It matters. But from a psychological standpoint, from 30 years doing therapy, Jake and Hannah, I think you agree, I know you do agree with the greater damage is the meaning we make of it going on. It's not the act itself. It's the meaning we make going on and generally that we make about ourselves. And I continue to, oh, to it's weighty for me to hear the testimonies from people, and I will say specifically women who have had acts done to them and the meanings they made, negative meanings towards themselves about what it meant
Right.
towards them, that I am dirty, I'm
Right.
unlovable, I'm less than, it's my fault, or whatever. And I look back and now with the sage orientation, look, it meant nothing about you other than if we want to talk about unluckiness or I don't know, you guys speak to that, but what it meant something about a broken guy, a broken
Right.
person. That's really
Exactly.
all that it meant. And yet that, I guess that brings us back to the psychological aspect of our humanity of how we so instinctively we got to make meaning. I can't reconcile this. I've got to make some kind of a meaning, even if it's a bad, negative, long-term, ongoing, horrendous meaning, but I've got to make a meaning. And that's what we're now saying. We have personal agency to decide the meaning and go back. I don't know if you want to speak to that or if that's another show, but and go back and look at some of those things if people are hearing this, realizing that they are damaging themselves today as a result of past trauma. Can you go back and reinterpret it? That maybe that's another show. That's, you tell
For
me.
me, it's just how do I choose to want to feel and live my life now? And do I want to be unhappy and miserable and feel damaged and all of that? I don't. I have a choice.
I,
And go
I
ahead.
will, if I can insert that, the thing that resonated with me is realizing that when I'll even go back 3 years, when I'm sitting in the counselor's office, I interpreted with an immature perspective. It was a non-sage, it was a threat driven, no personal agency. I interpreted it then. So now, in understanding the sage orientation, I realize, oh, I interpreted it. I don't know. I can immaturely, at least. If not, I might even look back. I interpreted that really crappy. That was an immature, unhealthy, very shallow, very limited interpretation that was, in some ways, I'm going to look at it and go, that was incorrect. It was bad. I can say it's, for myself, I can interpret it and go, but I get to reinterpret it now. So that's not just painting a better story and Pollyanna and anything.
No.
It's almost a course correction. What do you think?
And in your situation, the interpretation was very dated. In other words, at the time, say you were 50 years old and you were interpreting what was going on, I don't know, but as if you were a young man, I would say, a younger person.
Fair. Yeah.
So that meant there's a great distortion. In other words, internally, let's just say you're whatever, 15 years old, and it says you might relate to your father, but you're actually 50 years old and you're with a wife and a therapist. Hannah's situation, she's 11 years old and has limited capacity to
Yeah.
interpret things in a wide range of ways at that age. There's some flexibility, but there's not a huge range in terms of how to make sense of what just happened when you're hurt by somebody who you trust and is supposed to keep you safe. So in that situation, and this is part of why resilience has gotten distorted in the world of psychotherapy. Hannah's is a perfect story where people would say, you were damaged, you were hurt, you were traumatized, and thank God you're resilient. Thank God that you could get up and recover. And that's true. But then we take that same thing and we apply it to uh, not trauma, but minor insults or minor infractions. And we all of a sudden feel as if we have been knocked down. And we think we need to be resilient and recover. And that's really what I want to challenge people to think about, that from a different starting point and say, I haven't been knocked down. I haven't been knocked down. That's kind of me throwing my hands up. I need to be adaptable and I need to find a way to respond to this that is constructive. That's where we come back to being adaptable.
That Yeah, again, we're looking at that fear aspect, fear versus anxiety. And I'm thinking about my brother talking about anti-fragility. I have for a while now been enamored with myself and with the culture of going, we've become the most fragile culture ever, it seems, at a time when we are arguably at the safest physically. Few people, few people listening to this who would ever be able to listen to this are going to be in under physical duress. That the majority of our struggle is anxiety, is not a physical fear, it's anxiety. And Jake, that you've got your and we don't have time for it now, but how you look at anxiety with some different categories, but so much of it is in regards to our identity.
Yeah.
Just that again, Hannah, yeah, she suffered under the abuse of a larger man, an authority figure. I mean, so much more. And I suffered myself with a peer, my former wife.
Mhm.
There's no threat there. It was my identity, and
Yeah,
yet
pretty much
had to be
self-imposed.
resilient,
Right.
because I destroyed. Why are we getting to this fragile point? Is another aspect of that. I see, Mary, I see your comment. She says, I do like having a choice to reframe my interpretation. Yet I feel unsafe and knocked down with the challenge of new options. Fear, lack of boundary seems to rule her. Well, at least you're aware. Step one.
Well, and just play with the idea, change the idea that it's not fear, because as soon as you go there, you're
Right.
activating your primitive brain. So consider that what you're dealing with is you're making yourself anxious. You don't have anxiety. You're not an anxious person. You're making yourself anxious based on how you're interpreting whatever's going on. That's fine. That's fine. And we've interacted with you enough. I know you're bright and creative, which means that there are other ways that you could create interpretations, and see if you can find interpretations where your nervous system calms down. And then you recognize, gosh, I can do that for myself. And then this becomes a pattern where we're continuously looking for, how can I interpret this so that I feel comfortable in myself? It goes back to personal agency, leads to inner security.
Well, on our topic of resilience and adaptability, if you feel unsafe and knocked down, you're still having to, you get the chance now to take personal agency with your interpretation, but you are still needing to be resilient as opposed to coming over here. And what would adaptability look like? And you mentioned the word boundaries, Mary. I mean, at some point, if I encounter someone and I am can't quite figure out a way to interpret something beneficial to me, something constructive, something productive, and this keeps going on, then that's where the boundary comes in and going, I'm going to stop this relationship. I'm not going to continue in this job where I can't figure out a way how not to feel demeaned or how not to feel that this is toxic. I can't figure, and I'm going to be okay with that and interpretation. I think it would be constructive and productive for me to create a boundary and leave this job, this relationship, to change this, to do that, so that I don't have to be resilient. That may be a good way to look at it from a sage standpoint with boundaries. When I find that I'm having to interpret my way into resilience to bounce back from being knocked down, might be time to look at a boundary. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It
Hmm.
is one of the cleanest ways to streamline our relationships, is to let people know what our boundaries are and to invite them to respect our boundaries. Some people will, some people won't. Uh, it's not about making demands. It's not about ultimatums. It's just talking about ourselves. This is where I am. This is what I do to myself when you and I have these interactions. This isn't what I want to be doing. What I would like is X. And to do that would require a couple things to be different. Whether you want to make those changes or not, that's up to you. But that is my boundary.
And I do want to say, as I sit here, as I talk about my former therapy and former wife, that I did not do this at all in my marriage. My relationship in my marriage never got the chance for this because I did not do it. I did not. There were no boundaries, and there was nothing said in a sage orientation with me owning it.
Yeah, I want to just challenge that a little bit. There
Okay.
were some boundaries, but they weren't necessarily healthy boundaries.
Well,
For example, you allowed, I don't know all the details, but let's just say a couple allows, you allow each other to speak disrespectfully to one another. That's a
mhm,
boundary. You're going, yeah, that's okay. Yeah, I'm good with that. Well, that's not probably a healthy boundary, but it's a boundary.
mhm.
So you had some, but I don't know if they were healthy. Some of them were.
Yeah, a lot of unproductive,
Yeah.
unconstructive
Yeah.
boundaries that I was just I was not conscious. I was not conscious. So where am I on the consciousness spectrum right now? We don't know, and it ebbs and flows. Uh,
But
I ebb and flow.
I ebb and flow.
yeah.
Amen. Well, there's a good anchor. We're at an hour. Man, really enjoyed. Uh, but Mary, I see that she says no boundaries. Was it because you wanted to fix everything and be the hero who knew it all? I wanted to be the hero that could endure anything. Yeah, I thought that was my valiant identity right there. Instead of being honest, actually honest, and to some degree, I would say even caring enough. I think I kind of look back and go, I was caring more to protect. I was caring more about protecting my identity that I threatened myself with than I did for the relationship. I didn't understand that at the point. Uh, yeah, there we go. Well, another Sage discussion. Everybody who's there, thank you so much. I get a lot of, I value your input and responding to that. And I feel like these Sage sessions are best counseling sessions I have ever experienced. Thank you guys.
We appreciate people. We didn't get to see the chats, but we appreciate everybody being here,
Yeah.
and hope you continue to join us and invite other people if you think they would Sage themselves.
All right. Till next time.
Okay.
Aloha.
Aloha.